You don't get apologies by demanding them. You get them by becoming someone whose absence is felt more than your presence was appreciated. See, when someone with an avoidant attachment style hurts you, it's rarely about you. It's about their patterns, their fears, their need for distance when things feel too close. But if you chase, if you beg, if you try to explain how they hurt you hoping they'll see it, they won't. Not because they don't care, but because they can't care the way you want them to, while they're still avoiding themselves. So here's the shift. Instead of trying to make them understand, you let your absence speak for you. Not in silence meant to punish, but in space meant to protect. You communicate clearly. Once you say, "This hurt me, and I care about you, but I won't stay in a dynamic that keeps wounding me." Then you step back. You stop over-explaining. You stop hoping your pain will teach them something, and you let your standards do the talking. Because here's what happens when an avoidant sees that you're not chasing, not begging, not breaking yourself into smaller pieces to be palatable. Something in them shifts. They realize they're not being fought for, not because you don't care, but because you finally care about yourself more. That's when the apology comes, not always with perfect timing. Not always with perfect words, but it comes from the moment they see you stopped waiting for it. The irony, the moment you stop needing it, is the moment they might finally mean it. Avoidance hurt you from fear, not hatred. It's not that they set out to cause you pain, it's that they don't know how to face their own. When they start feeling something real, something close, it triggers the part of them that says closeness equals danger. Not because you're dangerous, but because love has always come with a cost in their world. Maybe they grew up believing that love meant pressure or control or abandonment, so now, when they feel affection, they flinch before they embrace. They pull away just when you start to lean in, and when they hurt you when they say something cold, go distant, or disappear. It's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of how terrified they are to truly show up. You might feel like you're being punished for loving too deeply, like your honesty, your affection, your desire to connect are the very things pushing them away, but it's not about you being too much. It's about them not knowing how to receive. They push you away to feel safe, because letting you in feels like losing control, and to them, control is survival. So when they hurt you, it's not calculated cruelty. It's self-protection disguised as detachment. It's fear wearing the mask of indifference, but here's the truth. Understanding this doesn't mean you excuse the pain. It means you stop internalizing it. You stop believing the lie that says, "If I were better, they wouldn't have left." Because that's not how it works. You could show up perfectly loving, loyal, patient, and they'd still run. Not because of you, but because they're still running from themselves. Your value doesn't change based on someone else's capacity to love. Their fear is not your flaw. Their emotional distance is not your failure. You didn't cause their fear. You just happened to get close enough to trigger it. So the next time they pull away, the next time they disappear without a word, remember it's not hatred. It's not rejection of you. It's a response wired by fear they haven't healed. And while you can't fix it, you can refuse to let it define you. Chasing for validation doesn't work. No matter how much you explain, plead, or pour your heart out, you can't force someone to understand your pain when they're not ready to hear it. You think if you just say it the right way, if you cry hard enough, if you break it down piece by piece, maybe then they'll finally get it. Maybe then they'll see how much it hurt. Maybe they'll care enough to change. But here's the truth. Explaining your pain over and over doesn't lead to clarity. It leads to exhaustion. It turns your pain into a performance. One you're hoping gets a reaction, but when someone's emotionally unavailable, they're not listening to understand. They're listening to defend, or worse, not listening at all. You start shrinking yourself just to be heard. You start softening your voice, tiptoeing around the truth, all so you don't push them further away. But love shouldn't feel like walking on glass. It shouldn't feel like you have to rehearse your pain just to earn basic empathy. You shouldn't have to become smaller to be understood. You shouldn't have to beg for something that should be freely given compassion, care, accountability. The more you chase, the more they run. Not because your pain is too much, but because facing it means facing themselves, and that's what they're really avoiding. You're not being dramatic. You're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong person to meet you where you already stand. Validation that is forced is never real. An apology that is begged for is never sincere, and understanding that must be demanded never lasts. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say it once, clearly, calmly, and then let your silence speak louder than repetition ever could. Because the person who truly cares won't need you to explain your worth. They'll feel the impact of their actions without you carrying the emotional labor of proof. You don't need to argue your pain into existence. You don't need to convince someone that you matter. You already do. And the moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop performing for their attention, is the moment you step back into your power. The power is in your response, not in how loudly you react, not in how deeply you plead, but in how calmly you decide where the line is. Because nothing speaks louder to someone who keeps testing you than you showing them that you don't need to fight to be respected. You simply walk away when you're not. A calm boundary says more than 100 emotional outbursts ever could. It says, I won't argue with you about how I deserve to be treated. It says, I don't need to prove my worth to stay. It says, I'm not here to convince you of what's obvious to someone who values me. We're taught that love means effort. That love means fighting for someone, but sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop fighting to be seen and start protecting your peace. Pleading says, please don't hurt me again. A boundary says, I won't allow myself to be hurt like this again. And there's a massive difference. One puts your power in their hands, the other takes your power back. See, people learn how to treat you not just by what you say, but by what you continue to allow. When you keep showing up after being dismissed, they assume your tolerance is endless. They assume your silence equals acceptance, but when you respond with quiet strength, when you say, this is my limit and I'm not moving it, that's when they feel the shift. That's when they're forced to look at their own behavior because you're no longer distracting them with your pain. You're no longer over-explaining your feelings or begging them to care. You're simply choosing not to participate in dynamics that dishonor you. It's not cold, it's not cruel, it's clarity, and clarity is power. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to cry to be taken seriously. You just need to be firm in what you will and won't allow. A calm boundary leaves no space for confusion. It's the quiet confidence that says, I know what I bring, and I won't beg someone to appreciate it. That's when everything changes, not because you forced it, but because you no longer chase what costs you your self-respect. One clear communication is enough. You don't have to repeat yourself to be taken seriously. You don't have to explain your pain a dozen times for it to matter. State your hurt once and mean it, not with anger, not with drama, but with unwavering truth. Say, this hurt me. Say, I felt disrespected. Say, this is what I will not tolerate again. That's it. You don't need to keep talking to be valid. You don't need to circle back just to be heard. The right people will listen the first time. The wrong ones will make you feel like your pain is a debate. When you repeat your truth too many times, it loses its power. It becomes background noise to someone who was never really listening in the first place. There is dignity in speaking once. There is strength in not pleading. You are not a broken record. You are not a lesson someone has to be forced to learn. You are a person with standards, and those standards deserve respect. People hear better when they feel the consequences of not listening, not when they're being lectured, not when they're being begged. But when your actions match your words, speak once, then move accordingly, because silence after clarity isn't passive, it's powerful. It says, I don't need to yell to be understood. It says, I trust myself enough not to argue for what I know is right. If someone hurts you and can't take your first message seriously, what makes you think the 10th will change them? It won't. They don't need more words. They need to feel what it's like when your energy pulls back. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away after the first explanation, not to be cold, not to punish, but to protect your value. You don't owe anyone endless chances to hear you. You don't owe anyone a softened version of your truth. You owe yourself peace. You owe yourself the kind of life where your feelings don't have to be shouted to matter. State your hurt once, say it with clarity, say it with calm, and then let your boundaries do the rest. Withdraw with dignity, not out of spite, not to manipulate, but because your peace is worth protecting. Silence isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's a boundary. Sometimes it's how you say, I won't keep trying to connect with someone who keeps disconnecting from me. You don't have to slam doors. You don't have to make a dramatic exit. You simply stop showing up in spaces where you feel unseen, unheard, or unvalued. Withdrawing doesn't mean you're giving up. It means you're giving yourself what they won't respect. Consideration, care. Silence used to hurt them is a weapon. Silence used to protect you is wisdom. You don't need to prove your point by arguing. You don't need to beg someone to acknowledge your worth. You let them feel the absence of your presence not to make them suffer, but to let yourself heal. Sometimes people don't understand the value of your presence until it's no longer available. And even if they never do, you'll know you walked away with your self-respect intact. There's a quiet strength in choosing yourself, not in anger, not in revenge, but in peace. You don't withdraw because you hate them. You withdraw because you love yourself enough not to stay where love feels one-sided. You stop repeating conversations that go nowhere. You stop fighting battles that leave you drained. You stop handing out access to someone who treats your emotions like they're negotiable. You don't raise your voice. You raise your standards. Let them wonder why you stopped reaching out. Let them sit with the silence, not because you want to hurt them, but because you've finally stopped hurting yourself for the sake of staying connected. When you withdraw with dignity, you send a message they can't ignore. You're done playing small just to stay in someone's life. You're done explaining your value. You're done choosing them over your own emotional well-being. And that kind of silence, that kind of distance, it speaks louder than any words ever could, not as punishment, but as protection. You're not being cold, you're being clear, clear about what you need, clear about what you deserve, clear about where your peace begins and where their chaos ends. So in the end, it's not about making them realize what they lost. It's about you realizing what you were always worth. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to stay to prove your loyalty. And you don't need to break yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. Withdraw with dignity. Speak your truth once. And then let your silence echo everything they refuse to hear, because the moment you stop chasing what hurts you is the moment you start attracting what heals you.